I wanted to put some inspiring background sounds in here so that my voice isn't too boring, but I had some technical difficulties, so imagine there's some inspiring spiritual background music playing. This is what I believe to be the ultimate platform of spiritual healing. The structure of the process of spiritual healing is built upon a foundation stone that bears the inscription, "There is no disease." Now that seems at first glance, at the first time you hear it, to the average, normally conditioned human mind to be kind of an outrageous claim. Well, to reach an altitude of consciousness above the human definition of normal, we have to rise above the entertainment of the belief and the feeling that our core being is of a human and mortal nature in the first place. I propose that it simply isn't. And that to know this spiritual fact that there is no disease is powerful. And in proportion as we know it, we can be enabled to break the many spells of human being. Now, before you just turn this off and go somewhere else, be aware of what I'm talking about. Be aware that the fact that there is no disease is a spiritual fact, and that it is not a human or material fact. So it's not a process of just going and hiding your head in the sand and pretending that something doesn't exist. It involves changing your conscious perspective to grasp this. Spiritual is absolute, and spiritual is the core of our being. Human and material comes from a relative perspective and is only the shadow of our true being. So in the context of this discussion, and in the language I like to use to describe reality, real is defined as that which is eternal, immortal. And if that's so, then therefore unreal is defined by that which is temporal, mortal, having a beginning, having an ending. So be aware that without a willingness to proceed from this standpoint that I just defined, and to attempt to understand that the presentation I'm giving here is from that standpoint, then the rest of this discussion is pointless and will just seem illogical. Our core being, our eternal nature, the part of us that was, is, and always will be, cannot be human and material. If our core being is actually human and material, then the whole concept of eternal consciousness must be a myth. And I understand that there is a faction of people who believe that existence is purely material and that death means it stops. I don't hold that position, and I'm going to attempt to explain to you why And over the course of time, I'll be telling you about evidence to the contrary that I've seen and experienced. So-called human beings, on the basis of their essence being spiritual, possess the freedom to choose where and how to focus awareness. To even begin to become convinced of our immortal nature as our core essence, we have to be willing to elevate the focus of consciousness to a higher level, to an awareness of perception that's totally undetectable by human material sense. If you haven't got a concept that exists, or are not willing to accept that you can mentally go there, again, this presentation is a waste of your time. But such an awareness already constantly lives deep in your thought, and it's comprised of spirit, which is the very foundation of our existence. It should be obvious that a consciousness centered on the exclusivity of the material human nature as the one and only valid condition of being able to exist is by its very nature totally incapable of comprehending even the suggestion of eternal and totally harmonious being. But I propose that we each do possess the power to focus and to refocus our consciousness. It's up to us to become aware of it and awaken it. If we don't, we'll continue in this dream of believing that existence is entirely mortal and human. Our accepted human education, that is the education that society agrees with, currently fails to even recognize this behavioral option of refocusing our conscious interpretation. And therefore it also fails to exercise this option. And so we seem to be at the mercy of conditions that we seem to not be able to control or understand. But it's because we don't understand our very existence. If we should ask ourselves now, where do I want to focus my awareness? We have now the power to mentally respond accordingly, and then go wherever we choose with our awareness. In fact, regardless of the conditions that seem to surround us, we already are and always have been exercising the power to respond to our experienced conditions in a way upon which we have already decided. That might be a long sentence. It's a bit too much to chew. But I say, regardless of the conditions that seem to surround us, because conditions don't surround us, our conscious experience surrounds us, and they feel to us like they're external human conditions, when they're not. Humans are ignorant that the origin and foundation of our environmental conditions are nothing more than the products of our own awareness. and that they include our deepest subconscious beliefs and convictions. And we're just not aware of that about ourselves. When our life presents itself as full of conditions operating apparently outside of ourselves, we have the power to be aware that there is nothing outside of ourselves, that we're witnessing our own consciousness, and that our responses don't happen on their own. Our responses are actually guided and controlled by the actions of our own decisions, our own conscious decisions. Nothing actually does operate outside of ourselves. But humanity lives in a self-perpetuated belief that it does. There can be no outside to the all-inclusive oneness that is consciousness. In the same sense as if you would consider the infinity of the universe, there's no outside to the universe because it's infinite. It's all-inclusive. Well, consciousness is the universe. The universe is consciousness expressed. We actually are observing the action of our own systems of thought. And most of our lives unfold habitually, automatically, subconsciously. But whether we realize it or not, we are the masters of habit and subconsciously entertained thought. We can be. And think about it, who or what else could be? Realizing this set of spiritual facts enables us to take control. An analogy would be being on the ocean. Instead of allowing a ship to just be aimlessly tossed around by the waves and the storms, if we find ourselves caught in a storm, we can look for a clear sky on the horizon, which eventually will appear, and then we can begin to guide our ship in that direction, towards where the waters are calm and peaceful. Now maybe you're asking yourself, or you can't see, how this way of thinking relates to the spiritual healing of disease. In response, once again, to that question, your apparent material and human conditions, including all of your bodily conditions, are not conditions at all. They are the manifest product of the quality of the consciousness that you constantly entertain. And you're in charge of the consciousness you entertain. Ultimately, you have to realize it in order to be enabled to change it. So the truth is that in healing, we're not working to eradicate a thing called a disease. Because there is, remember, at an absolute level of interpretation of being, which is our core essence, there is no disease. The presence or absence of disease in our life experience is only the manifest product of the quality of consciousness we entertain. So instead of focusing on removing dis-ease, I've hyphenated that. Dis-ease. We need to be actually working to consciously confirm the presence of ease, the diametrical opposite of dis-ease. Ease can be likened to the object upon which the light shines, while dis-ease is merely the shadow cast by it. Shadow is a form of presentation. We have to be aware, though, that the darkness within the shadow is not the reality of that which casts the shadow. But that's the way we interpret material conditions as human beings. There is only substance in the ease, which is. Ease is naturally self-perpetuating. Another word for ease is harmony. Ease is eternally harmonious and never ceases to display and manifest itself as eternally harmonious. It's up to us to develop the awareness to be conscious of it. So dis-ease is nothing more than the shadow suggestion of the opposite of ease. Dis-ease, when it's suggested and then believed in as substantial, is always discordant, always has a beginning, and it always has an ending. On the other hand, ease is harmony, and that which is harmonious is self-perpetuating. Harmony operates in a timeless, eternal sense, and therefore it has no beginning, it has no ending, has no development phase. Harmony is. Ease is. And therefore its opposite, dis-ease, is not. Now don't be confused on this point, because the mind is so conditioned to thinking as an educated human being. Don't get confused and think we're burying our head in the sand here. There is, of course, at least we're convinced that there is such a thing as dis-ease in what we as human beings know as the relative realm of consciousness, human life. And this relative realm comprises the majority of human consciousness, but there's more to consciousness than that. We have not been educated to detect it, and we need to teach ourselves to detect it in order to learn to develop a conscious ability to rise above discord. Dis-ease resides in belief. But the absolute truth is that there is no real relative consciousness. There is only the knowledge of is. And hence, there actually is no such thing as belief. Relative consciousness itself is made up of pure suggestion. Suggestion that becomes a relative reality through belief. suggestion of which the earthly mind is solidly but falsely convinced, which it interprets as its own mockery of truth. But this mockery of truth is a relative truth, and there is no relative truth. There's only truth. What we're battling is a deeply rooted, self-destructive mental conviction operating within the human mind with a small m, called disease. Human beings are unquestioningly convinced that their life is a relative version of consciousness. But this belief is itself deception. Belief never made anything absolutely true, but it certainly does make everything relatively true. But we have the choice what beliefs we're going to entertain. There is no relative truth. There's only is. We can make great strides and accomplish seemingly impossible tasks to the human mind when we begin to understand that we are not actually in any relative state of consciousness. Once again, not to go back to the burying the head in the sand syndrome. Once again, we are firmly convinced that we're living in a relative human consciousness. And relativism is the product of general human belief. General belief that is accepted and believed and lived by the masses. But that doesn't make the belief itself a reality. Belief itself is not. And it's a mental quantum leap to grasp that there is no belief. That is, again, remember, I'm talking about on the absolute and eternal plane. And keep in mind always that the absolute and eternal plane is the oneness that actually is and is the core of our being. There is only is. This is what it means when it's said that we live in a dream world. We live in a dream world. There are no relative consciousnesses in the plural. There are no real relative conditions, and the consequence of that is that from this perspective of our real true core being, there is no actual substance called matter. And it's an interesting point that the theories and proofs of quantum physics that the most advanced physicists have been working on developing over the past 100 years or so prove this point. But the human mind continues to fight against this proposition and make every attempt to justify and preserve its own imaginary selfhood. Another way to state this same point might be to say, or rather is to realize that that humans believe only the belief version of what might be called real. The reality we experience is the product of thought, always, but in its deepest substance, it's not belief-based. What's at the foundation of root? What is at the foundation and is the root of all that we experience is in an absolute sense. It must be in an absolute sense. But the relative form of its presentation, which is erroneous, hides this absolute nature. Real, on the eternal plane, is already here, now, fixed. It's not some place you have to go or something you have to find. Real is right here, within what you're living. Harmonious, underneath the surface of even everything that you find discordant in your human experience. Real on the temporal human plane, relative reality can vanish and change in an instant. But there's an absolute real, the only real that underlies that. Once we accept this as fact about reality, which is kind of a quantum leap, and we only seem to be able to accept it step by step. Once we accept this fact, we enable ourselves to grasp that we're actually never working to heal a material condition. That's the final objective. Indeed, improved and well matter is a side effect. It's a human product of elevated consciousness. But it's always just a side effect because there is no real matter in terms of being something that's eternally substantial. Matter is only the manifestation of limited thought. All material manifestation is temporal. Think about it. Matter is never eternal. Matter never presents itself in an eternal form. It's always changing. But eternal manifestation is spiritual. There is only thought. The one and only product of the one mind with a capital M, source with a capital S. And mind, being self-aware, is consciousness itself. And consciousness is self-awareness. But remember, it's mind with a capital M's own self-awareness. That's the only consciousness that is valid. There's only one self-awareness because there's only one is. And that is the self-awareness of the one mind with a capital M. And we each are included in its infinitude of unique, complete representations. The human mind with a small m mocks mind with a capital M's self-awareness. The human mind is a relative cloak. It's a misunderstanding of the only being that actually is, namely, absolute, eternal being. Diseased conditions are the manifestation of hypnotic falsehoods held as substantial by this so-called mortal human mind with a small n, which is a mere mockery of the one and only mind with a capital M, the source of consciousness itself. There is no mortal human mind with a small m, because there is only one universe expressed, one mind with a capital M, which is an eternal, infinite nature, and is all that with validity is. Immortal mind with a capital M is already, always has been, and always will be infinitely self-contained. All. It's impossible to add anything substantial to infinite self-contained allness. It's already there. And here's the trick. You can add imaginary reality, but it's nothing. It's only erroneous interpretation. There is no mortal person to entertain a human mortal mind that's born, develops, and then dies. These human concepts have their roots in the universally believed hypnotic conviction that we experience as human life, and which is a mere mockery of the true comprehension of that which is. There is only truth with a capital T, and the suggested supposition of its actually substanceless opposite is error, the opposite of truth. As human beings, we're confused. We're convinced that the manifest reality we know as matter is all that exists, when in fact the exact opposite is the truth. All that really exists, eternally and harmoniously, is oneness and its infinite manifestation, already complete, already necessarily harmonious. If it were not harmonious, it would self-destruct. So any conviction in destructive things is erroneous, and its reality exists as a result of a purely hypnotic state. And hypnotism is a condition entertained in a non-existent human mind with a small m. And because there really is no human limited mind with a small m, there is actually no hypnotism. and there are no actual results from hypnotism. Hypnotism is itself a hypnotic suggestion. Let that sink in. Well, these factors all do appear to exist in our relative version of consciousness. And we believe them. All do we believe them? Are we convinced of them? But there is no relative version of consciousness. The identity of we, when we say we believe them, is itself hypnotic conviction. Once again, the very existence of hypnotism itself is hypnotic. Hypnotism is a self-fulfilling fallacy. The understanding of this great fact reveals that human life, the mortal aspect of human life itself, is a self-deceived fallacy. Material conditions are merely the manifestation of the contents of our actually non-existent human mind with a small m. There are not many minds with small m's. There is one infinitely, eternally expressed mind with a capital M, whose effect is man, you and me, and every man, in the real spiritual nature. The closer we come to grasping that our life is not what it appears to be in the material world, and that we're not really living in a material body, because there is really no matter. In proportion as we begin to understand this, in that proportion do we apparently begin to demonstrate in a human sense that we are the masters of our own worldly conditions. We meet the most reliable success in this direction when we understand that our real objective then is not the control of worldly conditions and matter, but to overcome them, because they're merely hypnotic illusions, universally accepted and believed by human beings as our reality. And as we move beyond that conviction in the substantiality of matter, we become its master, apparently, because we understand that reality is something higher than that which comes to us through the material senses. It's something permanent, and it's unrelated to the forms presented to us in an apparently materially based reality. Now, people tend to freak out and immediately rebel against the concept that there's no matter, because by human logic, it's crazy, it's insane, and it defies the presentation of the senses. But belief in the presentation of self as the foundation of reality, that's the root of our problem. That's the stumbling block to the entire advancement of mankind's experienced conditions. Universally accepted hypnotic conviction in matter as the basis of life is the stumbling block we have to dismantle if we want to advance down the road of experiencing the higher manifestation of consciousness in which we already are living, but which seems to be masked from our awareness and experience by this huge influence of universal general belief. That's the end of my platform. I certainly hope you listened all the way through to the end. I realize that it's repetition and restating of the same points from many angles is probably obvious. That's necessary, though, in order to chip away and dissolve the stubborn self-preservation tendencies of the human mind with a small m. If you like this, please subscribe to my channel, join my Facebook page, because it's different from anything you're likely to hear in the New Age world in the discussion of consciousness. Thanks for being with me. I hope I'll catch you in the next video.